Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Braverman.
And I'm Ellen Selm.
And welcome to our podcast, Stories from the Earth,
where we explore mankind's relationship and connection with the natural world.
We would like to take a quick moment to invite our listeners to consider supporting us through a humble little donation. If you go to our Anchor page and check the support button, there are options to donate $1, $5, or $10, and the donations will go towards helping us with future projects, such as launching of our herbal education curriculum we have dubbed the People's Herb School, a program designed with affordability and accessibility in mind, as well as funding to help take this show on the road and do some on-site reviews and interviews at herb farms and schools and other interesting places relevant to our show's theme. We're also working on a Patreon page, so we'll have more information on that as well.
Today we're going to be talking with Linda Black Elk, Ethnobotanist and Educator, Director of Food Sovereignty at the United Tribes Technical College of Bismarck, and activist from Standing Rock who oversaw the medic tent at the Dakota Access Pipeline protests in 2016 through 2017.
We also welcome her husband, Luke Black Elk, an environmental studies major, Indigenous sovereignty activist, and direct descendant of famed Oglala Lakota medicine man Nicholas Black Elk.
Feel free to correct us if we pronounce anything incorrectly.
Yes.
Well, I should correct. I'm not from Standing Rock, but I think you meant from the Standing Rock No DAPL camps.
Yes,
which I did work at. So
okay.
Yeah, I think I don't know. In my mind, it's almost like anybody outside of where you are, if they hear Standing Rock, it's like that's immediately
totally
where the brain goes. It's like,
yep.
That was such a monumental historical moment.
Yes, it's true. In like people who are enrolled on Standing Rock, like my two older sons, I feel like they always appreciate the distinction. So I try to make it.
Yeah, that's important.
I'm actually from the Cheyenne River Reservation, which is just below Standing Rock.
Okay. Cool.
We're the same people, but we're just it's a U.S. government thing.
Yeah. So it's always confusing.
Those imaginary lines in the sand, you know.
I mean, for us, we're used to some of that because we have the Eastern Band of Cherokee here, and then there's also a Western Band, so
it's very similar. Yep.
And all this geography about where all the reservations are made me like want to, I need to look at a map because I don't know where, any of these places that I've heard. I know where South Dakota is, and
generally, right?
Generally, I've been there. I've been to, I think it's Badlands National Park there. One of my favorite national parks.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Luke almost got arrested there because he refused to pay the entry fee to go through the park. He was like, "This is my homeland. I'm not going to pay to go through my homeland." And the lady was not pleased, the park ranger, but it ended up fine.
Well, that's good. I mean, none of us should. Well, anyway, none of us should pay to go see them, but that's a whole nother issue, I guess, or
that's another podcast.
Another podcast, yeah.
And we support our national parks, but it was a different issue.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there would be maybe the government can actually just support them with the monies and the free to the people or something. I don't know, something like that, right? Yeah, I definitely support them. I'm so glad we have them.
Me too.
All right, so we're gonna start with a question to Linda. Linda, tell us a little about yourself and describe how you got interested in doing a professional path with ethnobotany and medicinal herbalism.
Awesome. Yeah. So I am honored to be here with you guys. I'm Linda Black Elk, and I'm the Food Sovereignty Coordinator at United Tribes Technical College. Go Thunderbirds. So United Tribes is actually a tribal college. I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with the tribal college system, but there are like over 30, I think going on 40 tribal colleges and universities within what's now the United States. And they are basically, fully accredited universities, but they focus on Indigenous people and having a decolonized Indigenous curriculum. So no matter whether someone is teaching like auto shop or calculus or, ethnobotany, our courses have to be culturally relevant, and they have to keep the indigeneity of our students in mind. And so I love teaching there. I teach ethnobotany and Indigenous food sovereignty, and I've been an ethnobotanist for a long time. I use that term instead of herbalist because of the academic aspects of what I do. But really, I think what I do on a day-to-day basis is I work with plants, and just like my mom before me, my mom, who is part Korean and part Mongolian, is, my husband can tell you, just an amazing ethnobotanist and herbalist in her own right, although she would never call herself that either. I've worked with plants my entire life. My grandmother also, my paternal grandmother, worked with plants as well, and incorporate tons of wild foods into our diet all the time. And we would go on walks together. And one of my very first memories is harvesting wild onions with her. So yeah, that really set the stage for me as I got older. When I started at university, which was kind of a miracle in and of itself, because I'm the first person in my family to ever go to college. But when I started, I had no idea really what I wanted to do. I just kind of, I had to take a class and someone was talking about botany. I was like, oh, well, I love plants, and so I started taking some botany courses and, throwing some anthropology in there and things like that. That led, of course, to a career in ethnobotany. I started teaching down at Sitting Bull College, which is the tribal college on the Standing Rock Reservation, over 20 years ago. And I was there for almost 2 decades before coming up to United Tribes, which is just north of the Standing Rock Reservation. So yeah, none of my knowledge is my own. None of it. It is all the result of talking to elders and other knowledge holders over my lifetime so far, and them sharing this knowledge with me. The elders from Standing Rock and Cheyenne River, where my husband is enrolled, and talking to people. I've been very lucky. I also got to work with elders in Australia and Aboriginal elders there, and
Wow.
I've been to what's now Canada and other places. So I'm very thankful for that.
Wow, that's so cool.
So it's sounding like your botanical education started with the family ties and still maintains that, but any formal education you've had was like botany classes in college, and then you've kind of put it together in the more ethnobotanical sense by drawing on your roots and everything?
Yeah, I would say the vast majority of my education is intergenerational. But, I really appreciate knowing the Latin names of plants, and I appreciate, having that perspective. I feel like the foundation of what I know and what I teach is that intergenerational knowledge. But like I said, I really appreciate that other side of things too. It's one of those things. My husband and I have had this conversation a lot about how important it is to be able to speak in the language of the people that you're working with. And I work with a lot of Western scientists, so it's nice to be able to communicate with them in that language.
Mm-hmm. I feel like the term ethnobotany has almost gotten, because Jennifer and I both have been into plants and plant medicine for a long time. And I feel like that term has gotten catchier just even in the last few years, like the amount I see it circulate in articles and online. And so maybe you could corroborate this, being that you're in the professional capacity with it, that's a really good sign that our mentality is kind of starting to shift, that even in the academic world, there's some minds starting to open a little bit more about embracing, that history of where the knowledge even has come from, instead of just being like, here's this isolated Latin term that you have to memorize, and go about your way. And like the story kind of helps connect it to the memory anyway, and certainly would hopefully then honor the travels that the story has taken to get to us, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I feel like ethnobotany has taken the stage, so to speak, in the last few years. You know, I feel like even since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, ethnobotany has, you're shaking the table, dear. Ethnobotany has really started
shaking stuff up.
Shake things up. Since the start of the pandemic, more people have become so interested in, hey, what plants can I use if I, you know, to prevent COVID, so to speak.
Right,
what plants can I use to treat symptoms? What can I use if there's like a complete collapse of society? And you know, people have really started to think about that more. And I think that those empty grocery store shelves at the beginning of the pandemic really scared people. And so the field of ethnobotany and these ways of knowing have become a lot more interesting to people, you know, and it's not, I don't think that people are so much interested in the academic aspects of ethnobotany. But I think that they're very interested in like, okay, you know, how, because, you know, people are really starting to see, especially, you know, Robin Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, and she had a wonderful book before that called Gathering Moss. And, you know, these books are really starting to make people understand that Indigenous knowledge is so relevant, and so important to everyone right now. How can that help me survive and thrive? You know, and I think, you know, Indigenous people have always been doing this. You know, like, this is just our life, but I think the mainstream population is also becoming more aware of that.
Used to be closer to the land. I think the Native peoples have held on to that connection, where us non-natives have not been able to hold on to even some of the traditions we came over from Europe. Like, I know we had herbal traditions and all kinds of other traditions that came over. My immigrants, I believe they're from like Russia and Romania, and I know that they had those traditions, but I never got to learn anything.
And you have to realize that it's, you know, you're also, those people who came over got totally removed from their natural environment and came to a completely alien place, you know, so they had no way to connect to that area, you know.
Right. Yeah, we tell our friends, you know, because we get asked questions a lot from non-native friends and herbalists, people who work with plants, like, hey, how do you guys feel about us smudging with sage, for example? And what we say is, you know, like, especially if you are with Indigenous people, those things tend to be really fine. But there, you know, don't forget about the amazing ethnobotanical, you know, plant knowledge that you come from, and how important it is for your own mental, spiritual, emotional health to reconnect to that, even in this space. And so we've been really encouraging a lot of our friends to, you know, we have friends who are of Celtic descent and things like that, and we've really been encouraging them to get back to some of those plants, you know, whether it's mugwort and, you know, burning those, and, you know, sweetgrass actually is, it grows in Europe as well, and is relevant to people over there. And, you know, getting back in touch with some of those, reconnecting with those, you know, I think it's so important for people, and it helps to sort of connect them to this land a little more too.
I remember in Braiding Sweetgrass, she talks about, or becoming native is sort of, it's like we came over and this is sort of an adopted home. Like, everyone is feeling some sort of, that they want to connect more with where they are.
Yeah.
The industrial capitalist environment has affected everyone, you know.
Yes. Yeah. No. And you know, we just think it's so important. Like, and it's not just about like utilizing plants or whatever, smudging and things like that. I think people a lot of community people just want to only delve so far in, like they're afraid to do a deep dive. And so they're like, oh, smudging looks easy, and they don't want to do the excruciating work of developing a relationship with plants. So like one of the, there was maybe a question you were going to ask about, what's something that you would recommend to people who maybe want to get started on this journey. And it is always, I always tell people, you have to develop a relationship with plants. Learn their names. That's great. Learn their names in your language, even talk to them, speak to plants, because they will speak back to you. We believe wholeheartedly that plants are as sentient as animals, or anything with a central nervous system, just as sentient, just as feeling, just as communicative. And if we speak to them, they will speak back to us. Pray with them, sit with them, ask questions, ask permission. Developing a relationship with plants is a lot like developing a relationship with people, and you have to develop trust and you have to spend time with it. And that's tough. That's tough for a lot of people. Like, I feel like people only want a superficial relationship with plants. And, I have a lot of students, non-native students in particular, who are like, well, can I eat it? And that's pretty much all they want to know. I always encourage them to go a little deeper and really nourish that relationship.
Tell us a little bit about the program you're heading up at the United Tribes College, pertaining to food sovereignty and preservation of Indigenous knowledge. I think you already told us a little bit about it, but if there's anything else?
Yeah, I can go a little deeper. So I have to say, I have trouble just sitting, doing nothing, like, staring at a screen. So I'm actually peeling a squash right now. I can't help it. We also have so much stuff to process and dry, like from our gardens, that we hardly have any free time. So I'm just waving a knife around and a squash.
That's fun. That'll be incredibly fun when everyone watches that on YouTube. I like to fiddle with things in my hand too. So I have crystals, and I just
so if you see a knife waving around, don't fear for my life. I am perfectly
well, you just have a bigger knife.
So, United Tribes is actually really fun. And right now I'm teaching my classes online. I don't know how long that will last. Of course, since the pandemic, a lot of classes have gone online, and a lot of students don't want to go back. But we still, have some students, and I would say especially newer students who are like, whoa, wait a minute. I want the hands-on stuff. Like, I don't want to just watch you peel a squash online. I want to be there in front of you, teaching me how to do this so that we can, hang it on this rack behind us and dry it together and, and apply that knowledge. So my classes at United Tribes Technical College really focus a lot on hands-on education, project-based learning, also on like, what do I want my students to know in order, not necessarily even to get a job, but to take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. So my views actually on education have changed a lot in the last few years. I used to really focus on the idea that I wanted my students to be able to get a good job. And now I'm kind of like, F that, I really want them to be able to take care of themselves and their families and their communities. And if that means that they can grow all their own food, build themselves a house, and make sure that they have access to clean air and water, then that's really, what more could I ask for as an instructor? Can they heal themselves and their families and their communities when people are sick? Can they feed themselves when people are hungry? Those are the questions I really ask myself now, and that's a lot of what I teach. I don't just tell them that Indigenous people, their people air dry squash to use later in soups and stews. I give them squash or have them grow the squash, and then I teach them how to cut it, hang it, dry it, and then cook it. That process from the very beginning, starting with those seeds, seed saving, and what different seeds are to different people, and then way through to the actual consumption of the food. And it's really important for me to focus on how is this not just food? Sorry. How is this not just food, but how is it medicine as well? What is, a squash going to do for you physically, emotionally, spiritually, besides just provide calories, Mm-hmm. So, and we do that with like all foods as well. I mean, squash actually does have a lot of really wonderful medicinal compounds. Yeah, we focus on that a lot, both of us, in what we do and how we teach.
And the fact that this was a wild plant at one point in time that Indigenous people have had a long-term relationship with. They've taken and molded that into something that is able to feed us in a larger quantity than just going out and foraging.
The school sounds great, but
it is.
It's just, I think those skills are so needed. And
yeah, it's like the back to basics of humanity. It's like, this is how to live, in case you forgot.
How a lot of people have.
One thing we've ran into, you talk to young people or even older people at this point in time, and you ask them, where does hamburger come from, or where does food come from, and the answer is a grocery store a lot of times, instead of being the environment or the natural world around you.
Yeah, one of my favorite questions to ask, we do a lot of classes and educational stuff with little children, and so for instance, we were in a classroom down at Marty Indian School on the Yankton Ihanktawa Dakota Nakota Reservation, and we asked this group of fourth graders, about the plants that they eat. And a lot of them didn't realize that even if they're eating cereal for breakfast, they're still eating a plant, just no concept of where food comes from. And we've even had, I've never had a Native student say this, but I've actually had non-Native children, when I hold up an ear of corn, for example, they're like, that's not corn. Like, corn is the yellow stuff in a can,
Wow.
They've literally never seen corn on a cob even, and don't know that it, grows that way. So it's important for us to talk about that stuff as well. And when was the last time any of us ate something that wasn't either sweet or salty in any way? When was the last time we really concentrated on those bitter flavors? And because bitter is where all the medicine is, bitter greens and things like that. Coffee doesn't count, is what I always tell my students. Even when it's bitter greens, we almost always put salt or sugar, something sweet on top. Salad dressings have some of the highest sugar content of any processed foods. We try to talk to our students about how their palates have become colonized. Our minds have also become colonized, but our palates have become colonized, and we need to decolonize, the way that we think about food, but also even the way that we taste food. Build that bitter tolerance back up.
I mean, I have some digestive issues, so in learning about them and how to help them, I found out that bitters are really good for digestion, and so I couldn't eat, like, some people make bitters that you can buy, but I also had issues with that, so I started just eating like radicchio, like just a bitter hit of something, and
radicchio is medicine, we really have forgotten that,
straight up.
Yeah,
radicchio.
It is. That's awesome. I'm really happy to hear that.
A part of our COVID prevention routine is actually to take bitter tinctures. We do, of course, love to do teas, and we love to encourage people to eat bitter greens and things like that. But that's tougher than taking a tincture. Although if you ask our kids, andrographis tincture, they would rather eat a huge salad than take andrographis tincture. So, but we have, been talking about the importance of that. And I was actually looking at Moxie soda the other day. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Moxie soda.
No.
Our son actually was interested in trying some of these weird sodas, like dirt soda and mustard soda, and these things exist, I promise you. But one of the weird ones he got was this stuff called Moxie, and I drank it and I said, this tastes really familiar.
Is there mugwort in it?
It's really popular up in the northeastern United States. Moxie, Moxie. Yeah. And so I looked up the ingredients, and it has gentian in it.
Oh.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? It's basically, I guess it started off as like a bitter tincture sort of medicine, like a lot of sodas did. But.
Right. That's cool. We don't have, we're in the South, so we don't, in the Southeast, so we don't have that one. We've got a RC Cola.
I remember RC. Yeah, no medicine in RC.
And they took all the medicine out of most of the cola.
Yeah.
They did.
All right, we have a dear friend who's an amazing forager, and he writes beautiful books. His name's Sam Thayer, and he is convinced that when people are craving Coca-Cola or any of those dark colas like Pepsi, they're actually craving bitter greens. That it's actually a physical response to the lack of the nutrients in bitter greens, because Coke, if you really think about it, it is highly sweetened, but it does have those background vegetal sort of bitter notes to it. Yeah, so he's convinced that if you're craving Coca-Cola or any soda, like dark soda, eat some bitter greens and it'll take your craving away.
Luke, you are an environmental studies major, but that's a pretty broad title. So do you have a particular area of special interest that you're studying, or like a field that you're working towards getting into? Like, what's your plan going forward with that?
So I do have a field that I'm kind of going towards, which is hydrology. And that's mostly because my people live right along the Missouri River. About 80 years ago, they installed a series of 5 dams along the Missouri, ostensibly to control flooding and create hydroelectric power and things like that. But it completely decimated tribal land. So my interest is in regenerating some of the cycles that have gone awry since then in the local environment. You know, we've gone from what was once probably a soft rain cycle, which means the rain would hit very gently to the ground, and then it would hit this riparian zone before it hit the river and kind of soak back into the earth and recharge natural groundwater, and kind of, you know, this was just a lush area. And since the dams have been installed, we've gone from that lush area where people didn't have to be on subsistence of any kind. All the food we needed grew around us. There was animals in plenty, to an area where cattle ranching has completely taken over, and monocropping is completely become the status quo for growing crops. And we've gone to this hard rain cycle where there's lots of like washing out of land and things like that. So that's why my focus is going to be on that. And it's more to be able to have people in the outside world understand the problems that we're facing here, and that it's not, you know, we do have problems with losing our language. There's alcoholism. There's all these, you know, this stacked on problems, you know, but it goes way deeper than that as far as what the government and broader group of people have tried to do to Indigenous people.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like all of those like social issues that everyone stereotypes Native people with, you know, like alcoholism and all of that. There's recently actually a lady on Fox News who said racism isn't the problem, alcoholism is the problem, basically. Yeah, Fox News. Yeah, I promise I'm not watching it by choice, but it's so crazy to hear that people still think that, when actually numerous studies have shown that non-Native populations have more issues with alcohol than Native people. You know, we have all kinds of issues, of course. People are fighting for the water. People are fighting for, you know, against Native mascots. People are, you know, battling depression and anxiety, land loss, all kinds of stuff. But those issues exist in mainstream society as well. We really feel like, you know, the way to combat those social issues is by returning to the land as much as possible. And so when I asked Luke, like, what are you gonna finish your degree in many years ago?
It's a process.
Congrats though on
that. It really, I think for both of us, Western education has become more of a tool in order to fight the colonizer. A degree in hydrology would go a long way to talking to the Corps of Engineers about how they can stick their dams up their butt and tear them down and all of that. So I think that's really important to both of us.
Well, and I think it's going to end up being not even end up, it is, and it should already be, but it will increasingly become so, hopefully, in the mass consciousness, that it's a necessary thing, because as we're facing so many climate impacts that have been self-imposed, and people are going to be pulling their hair out, like, what do we do? What do we do? It's like, well, ask them. They're just, and they've known the whole time, But yeah, I could see why that. So you gotta play the game. You gotta learn the language, kind of like with the plants and the Latin. Same with the hydrology, to be able to like get people to take you seriously, only for them to go, oh yeah, that's what we should have been doing the whole time. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, if we engineered our way into this mess, we can engineer our way out of it. It's just the focus. Like, they're not. Just the shift in focus on what's important. Right. The reason they put in the dam is for way different reason than the way that it's like, I think we should take them out.
Yeah. And it's happening, especially in the Western United States. Dams are being taken out, and, traditional flooding regimes are being re-implemented. And it's like Luke was saying, back when the rains would just flood in, soak into the earth, like now you can actually see it because of our lawns, because of our ranches, because of our farms, because of all the cement everywhere we look. Water just runs right off into these lakes and streams and other bodies of water, and then it moves extremely fast, and none of it is soaking into the earth, feeding our plants. And so we have huge issues here in the Dakotas, especially with invasive species, with desertification, with our plants basically leaving, and lower populations of traditional medicines and foods. It's just something we really need to work on and look at. So that's a big focus for us. And it all really comes back to sovereignty, food sovereignty in particular,
and food security.
Yeah, sovereignty and security in general. Yeah.
Have you guys ever heard of the book Pastoral Song? Relatively new, and I'll after we get off the air, I'll bring it up and show you, because it's about this guy on his family farm in England, and how like he grew up with his grandfather and his father teaching him, and how they started doing the monocropping and all the industrial stuff, and what it started doing to the land, the whole story. And then they actually had friends in the United States, and they came and they're like, oh, this is our future. Oy, oy. Because they were basically like using all this fertilizer and all this chemical fertilizer. And it was just like destroying the soil. The soil was dead. Anyway, it's a really, really good book. So
I'd love to see that. Yeah. And there are so many stories of awakenings too, even in Luke's family. Luke comes from a ranching family, but even they have gone to having gorgeous lands and really doing amazing things with the land that they're on, trying to do things in a better way while still feeding people. I believe in balance.
It's possible.
It's possible. Yeah.
Not the all or nothing approach. That's not going to end well.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, no, people will get really pissed off if you try to take away their hamburgers.
I don't know why. I don't like hamburgers.
Yeah.
For some reason, we're just like, we're all going to die.
You don't have it either until you say cheese, and then.
Oh, right. No, I do like cheese.
Yeah. No, because that's like when, we talk about how even though we've worked really hard to decolonize our diet, and we eat an incredible amount of traditional foods, And we spend a lot of our time growing food, foraging, harvesting, hunting, all of that, fishing even. But I love cheese, and I love brownies, and I love bacon.
Brownies.
We all have our things, is what we say.
Unfortunately, I can't eat regular cheese, but they have some amazing nut cheeses now. They're just so good, and I'm equally addicted. I'm just like, it's not even what you might call cheese, but it just tastes delicious. I don't even know.
You'll have to send some of your favorites, because our 6-year-old, so we have 3 sons. They're 19, 18, and he just turned 18 a couple days ago, and then 6, and so age gap there. But our 6-year-old has a really severe dairy allergy, and so he can't eat any dairy at all. And it's not lactose intolerance. Like, he has a dairy allergy. He's allergic to the milk proteins. So we've tried goat cheese and all kinds of stuff, and he can't eat it. So
he's very upset about it.
Yes.
Yes.
He loves cheese. So send us some of your favorite the names of the companies that we can.
Yeah, I've got 2 that I'm eating currently. One is like a more of a melty one, where like it comes in shredded form, and and then the other one is more like a spread almost. It's a cashew cheese, and it's just, so I feel like he might like the melty one better, but who knows? This other one is good too.
Yeah.
So
sometimes he'll say to us, like, if we get him a burger without cheese, or make a burger for him without cheese, he's like, just put the cheese on there and I'll handle it. We're like, no.
I mean, unfortunately, they don't taste exactly like cheese, but they do work, and they do
just
taste
appreciate them for what they are.
I am just happy to have that grilled cheese. And
cheese is kind of a weird concept when you really think about it.
It is. Milk, non-human milk in general is kind of a weird thing for humans to be consuming anyway. So
yeah.
So how would you say you're both using your knowledge to work to build bridges between ancient ways of knowing coupled with modern science, the preservation of traditional ways coupled with relevance to our modern era? And I think, Linda, you answered that in a lot more context than Luke, so maybe you haven't something to add.
Yeah, I do. I kind of take issue with the idea of ancient ways of knowledge, that terminology. And it's not, this isn't to chastise you. It's just to educate people, right? That makes it feel like somehow I'm like garnering knowledge, like sifting through the dirt, as an archaeologist, looking at things and like figuring out these things. This isn't ancient ways of knowledge. This is things that our grandmas and grandmas do. This is things that our grandparents did on a regular basis. Just like you were saying, your Russian grandparents who came over, they had a broader knowledge of what they needed to do to survive, right? So this is, it isn't bridging ancient knowledge with modern science so much as it is getting modern science to understand that Indigenous people have had scientific method and scientific knowledge for generations now.
Forever.
Yeah, and it's not something that's new with Western science. I think that Indigenous and non-Indigenous people have been taught by the modern education system. When first contact happened, which is a weird term that we won't get into at this time, when first contact happened, we were like these Stone Age people who were barely ugga-bugging around, around fires, and like scraping the dirt to survive, when there were millions of people just in the North and Central America part of this continent who were being fed by a farming system and animal husbandry, even though it's not the same kind of animal husbandry that exists in other parts of the world. We weren't we weren't like petting buffalo and out there milking them for cheese, but we were, we had there were buffalo that existed on the plains. There were buffalo that existed in the woods, in the north,
and tons of management systems to, like intricate management systems, intricate trade networks, that actually, interestingly enough, I don't know if you guys saw the article, but the modern interstate system, the quote unquote modern interstate system, actually follows indigenous trade networks. Wow. So those pathways
really
we took to trade with each other are actually, you can see where the interstate system overlaps with those trade networks, and it's not that it's not an ancient system of knowledge, but it's
timeless, maybe,
right, and but also dynamic, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not that we're stuck in time, doing these things that our ancestors did. It's that our knowledge is just as much, indigenous knowledge is just as much science, based on a relationship and long-term observation and experimentation with the natural world. And, it has, of course, evolved like everyone else has. We actually considered Western science to be a subset of indigenous knowledge, because indigenous science, indigenous knowledge, we have, like I said, all the experimentation, all of this empirical knowledge, the observation, and all of that. But we also never forget about the importance of dreams and visions and emotion and feeling,
being connected
and connection and sentience of non-human things. And Western science is sort of missing some of that. So it's really just a subset. It really only takes part of of stuff into consideration. And so we really feel like, indigenous knowledge is just as important and relevant and needed for answering questions today as it always has been.
One of the stories that Linda often tells is talking about sand cherries, and how she was told by an elderly woman, and it's kind of knowledge that's within the tribal knowledge base, that you don't approach sand cherries from upwind. You only approach them from downwind. And what you have to realize too is a lot of what we call indigenous knowledge, is been something it's being translated from a language into English, which is very, very difficult
limited
to do. As much as you can say in English, it's very limited as a language. And so, so the best way that some of these elders would describe it is you can't approach, you have to approach from downwind, otherwise the plant will smell you coming.
It'll turn bitter.
And it'll turn bitter, right? And that was the best way to explain it in English. Linda was actually able to take Western science and show people why this happened.
Okay.
And that there was a process and there was a knowledge there that existed without there having to be a testable hypothesis,
Yeah. That knowledge about sand cherries, Prunus humila, comes from a relationship with that plant, right? Building a relationship, having that those long-term observational skills. And so, you do approach sand cherries from downwind. Otherwise, they kind of do smell you coming, because they have these stomata that open and close. And if they pick up on, any animal, and it's not pheromones, there's something else we're giving off. I can't remember what it is, but they pick up on, whether it's a deer or a person, they will actually take that chemical signal into their stomata, and they'll start producing bitter alkaloids, so that the deer munching on them will not eat as much, and or the person munching on them will not eat as much. So it's a matter of relationship and respect. And so, that's incredible indigenous knowledge that still is relevant to what we're doing today. So yeah, I think it's so important to talk about that. And there are tons of examples of it too. But that did, like when we were talking about the stomata, I was working with a chemist up at North Dakota State University. So we were using those Western methodologies because we had a question about indigenous knowledge, not to prove anything, but more to say, hey, check this out. Isn't this cool? Because I do think the two knowledge systems can work together create something that's more interesting. And
like that process was sort of the process of trying to find a common language for it. Like you were saying, Luke, English being very limited. And so people are thinking almost too literally maybe about like the plant smells you coming in does that. It's like, but then if you can show through that scientific method, well, like this is the process of what is happening, then it's like suddenly I guess it clicks in the English brain of like, oh, okay, yeah. Now right. I see what you meant. It was just a matter of communicating it in the same, finding a way to say it that everybody understood.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. I mean, I think another really great example of that is the Three Sisters gardening system. I don't know if you're familiar with the Three Sisters, but of course, it's just corn, beans, and squash. The corn, it serves as a stalk and provides the corn, of course. The beans climb the stalk, but the beans are also putting nitrogen back into the soil, because they're a legume. And then the squash are spreading out on the ground, shading the ground, holding in moisture, and preventing the growth of weeds. And so the way English that's translated as the Three Sisters, like this indigenous concept of these three plants are really good relatives to each other. They're really good to each other and they help each other grow, kind of like sisters. And so, but when we look at that from a Western perspective, of course, it's not as beautiful, but we say, oh yeah, one's a stalk, one serves as a nitrogen fixer, and one serves to shade the soil and prevent the growth of weeds.
That's pretty beautiful.
It's pretty cool, especially if you're a gardener. But I think seeing those plants that, of course, indigenous people realized corn, beans, and squash weren't related on a genetic level necessarily, but recognizing that they take care of each other is important.
They're a adopted family. They're a family you find or family you make.
Yeah, which actually for Lakotas is, family that you choose.
That's what I meant. Sorry.
Is more important than, I don't know about important, more like of a serious relationship than ones that you're just kind of thrown in with.
Right, like sometimes you don't quite get along with your closest blood relative for whatever reason, you just don't know, but like somebody who you're not related at all, you're like, you're my best friend.
Yep.
I'm surprised we're not related. So I was thinking when you're talking about the two languages and everything else, so it's almost like there's two different ways of looking at the world, the planet, and it's like also we're using two different languages to express those two different viewpoints. And so we're all trying to figure out how to communicate both of those, both in language and in practice, concept. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's true. It's kind of like communicating with plants, right? You have to learn their language, and it's not the one we're all speaking in now, So it takes time, and that's okay,
And when you explain, about the Three Sisters, and then also how the science behind it, it's almost like those signs with different languages on them. Right. You're looking at them in the same way, different way at the same time. You've both been invited to give lectures in various countries around the world. And what has been the subject to prompt these invitations, and has your platform found relevance on a global stage, and how does it translate to a global message? I guess this is maybe for both of you.
Yeah, only in that to kind of add to that, Luke, I think you've done some educational work alongside Linda as well. So what are some of the things you've both worked on, for that matter?
First of all, we love meeting new people and talking to people, even though both of us, I know it doesn't seem like it all the time, but we are major introverts. But
you're in good company. This is like, wow, it's a big day. I'm on a computer screen.
Well, and the thing is we're on computer screens all the time, and we do podcasts and interviews and classes and workshops and things all the time on the computer and in person, and all over. okay, dear. Take a deep breath. I can like feel just talking about those things making him anxious, you know?
Oh no.
Yeah, we both have major like social anxiety too. It's so important to us to like get this message out because we can't do it alone. You know, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is that, you know, when we talk about like Luke and his family started a model sustainable community on the Cheyenne River Reservation. And it's really one of the first like model sustainable communities of its kind, completely off grid. His sister lives there full time, experimenting with solar power, experimenting with wind power, different sustainable house, permanent sustainable home designs and things like that, and how they can be reflected in traditional home design. It's amazing. We want the whole world to be doing that. We don't just want that on this little spot on the Cheyenne River Reservation. We want everyone to see that. We realized a long time ago, and I probably realized before Luke, because he was just like, hell no, I'm not going to put myself out there and talk about it. But I realized a long time ago that if we want the whole world to be doing this, we have to get out there and talk about it. What we're doing has been very well received. More and more Indigenous communities are looking at traditional medicine, traditional foods, food sovereignty. We are part of an organization, actually, we're both on the board. It's called Makoche Ikikchupi. That means, you know, land, like land reclamation, land recovery. We're actually building an Earth Lodge village on Dakota lands in Minnesota. And, you know, it's like there's such beautiful structures, Dakota Earth Lodges. Those Dakota Earth Lodges, even though that's a way for Dakota people to reconnect and all Oceti Shakowin people, even though that's a way for these Indigenous people to connect, it is a viable solution for everyone.
I think that it is a viable solution for everyone, and I think, you know, that we have to realize, you know, North and South America have sustained people, millions of people for thousands of years, you know, and we can bring that back. We just have to stop depending so much on industrial agriculture and monoculture. And, you know, and when we speak of it, when we talk about Indigenous communities, we're not just talking about Indigenous communities here in North America or even here in North and South America and Central America. There are Indigenous communities all across the world. We all need to get back to our Indigenous ways, you know. It's like you were talking about the farmers from Europe who were, you know, who were seeing this happen, you know, and you know, it's a battle against McDonald's and that ilk. Not, you know, not to say that I don't enjoy the occasional Big Mac every so often, you know.
They make them tasty,
right? You know, there's a reason they do that. But fighting against that in every way possible, and people are so scared now because they're like, oh my God, look at you know, McDonald's and Taco Bell are all hiring. Why aren't people working there? And it's like, maybe people are just getting more informed about what they want to eat, you know.
And they're like, screw those guys. Because they don't make them tasty. They make us think they're tasty. Right? I mean, there are things specifically put in those processed foods to make us really believe that those things taste good. When in fact, if those, you know, if you took out just 2 ingredients from a Big Mac or whatever, like sugar and MSG, you probably would not think that they tasted so good, you know? It's important for us because, you know, industrialization, colonization, it doesn't just impact people of color. It's impacting everyone. And, you know, we used to have discussions about how brown people are kind of the canaries in the coal mine. Like everyone talks about like, oh, diabetes in Native communities or alcoholism in African-American communities, drug use in Black communities. I mean, you know, it's everyone is talking about that, but no one is seeing that it's everywhere. It's just much more well hidden in white communities. That stuff is just rolling forward and we're starting to see it more and more. There are just as many white heroin addicts who are our school principals and doctors and lawyers as there are of any other group of people. We all need this. The issues that we've been facing as people of color and Indigenous people worldwide, it's starting to impact other, you know, communities as well. So yeah, I mean, you know, it is also important for us to connect with Indigenous people all over the world, not just because, you know, my mom is an Indigenous woman from not from North America. we look at how climate change is affecting Indigenous communities all over the world, whether it's up north of the Arctic Circle or some of our friends, who live in countries in Southern Africa who are just roasting every summer now, how they are dealing with climate change is eventually probably how, it's going to give us really good clues as to how we're all going to have to start dealing with climate change, because it's hitting those Southern peoples first.
No one's spared.
No, correct.
We're all in this together because we all live on the same planet.
I think one of the best memes I've ever seen is there is no planet B,
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Or we also love the meme, that old cartoon when they talk about how, we'll try not to pollute this particular river because, that's an important river. But then there was a meme that came out with like the peeing section of the pool, right? It's kind of all going to affect us the same.
We're all getting pool pee.
Yes.
Can you define and explain what a sovereignty activist stands for? I'm assuming that title is referring in particular with your work to Indigenous sovereignty. Is that correct? Like, when Linda said, can Luke be on the show too? He's this, and this. And she said Indigenous sovereignty activist. So tell us more of what that entails.
Indigenous people are inherently sovereign. We were a people before,
before America.
Before America, we were sovereign nations. There were many sovereign nations across this continent. It's about reestablishing that idea. Self-determination, getting Indigenous people to realize that we are if we choose to be, we are United States citizens second, and hold loyalty to our Indigenous selves first. Whether that's something that you hold in your heart, or whether that's your tribal nation and its ideals, you have to choose those things, but that we are sovereign, and it's kind of a hard question to understand, because you have to have some knowledge about the tribe and its process of going through the different tribes, and when I say tribe, I speak for my own tribe and our process of having to go to the Supreme Court in order to get decisions finalized with our treaty rights, and how those things affect us. We can't just make decisions for ourselves in a lot of ways, right? We can't process a lot of our own criminal. There are ways for our people to deal with criminal activity, and if we were able to deal with the crime within our own boundaries, in our own traditional manners, I think things would be a lot better for us. Instead, when things happen, there's what was called the 7 Major Crimes Act at one point in time, that was in place by the government, the specific branch, I can't remember. I think it's up to like 22 or 28 different crimes that happen within the reservation boundaries that we can't deal with within our own court systems.
Right. They get prosecuted by the federal government rather than tribal governments.
Which is just a part of the ongoing, you see a lot of the talk about the boarding school and the atrocities that happened there. This is ongoing, taking Indigenous people away from Indigenous communities and putting them in places where they are no longer able to be Indigenous in quite the same way.
It's crazy because, they use, for instance, parental drug use as an excuse to take Native kids away from Native families. And then they send them off to white families and then give those white families money to take care of those children, when they could have prevented the issue in the first place if they had been giving proper support to the Indigenous families. It's a ridiculous notion to take children away from, Native children away from Native families. And so it's still happening. The boarding school era is different. And frankly, the boarding school era never ended. I mean, there are still boarding schools and native boarding schools. We have big issues with what's going on within the foster care system as well. It's just another way of taking native kids away from their families. So
yeah, that's like there's not any particular effort to be like, okay, we'll place them in a home of another Indigenous family for the time being. Like they won't even try to keep it in-house, so to speak. I mean, it's
wow. Well, so there is an act called the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA, they call it, Indian Child Welfare Act. And that is an attempt to keep Native kids on the, within their communities. It is very easy to bypass that, unfortunately, by saying, oh, there isn't a family available, or, oh, one of the parents wanted the child to be sent away because they're worried about the influence of, other family members and things like that. It's a tough situation.
More of the government's penchant for talking out two sides of their mouth of like, oh, yeah, you're sovereign, except A, B, C, D.
Except these things, exactly. Yeah, and so a lot of the work that Luke does has to do with that, So, for example, okay, so I have to say this. It's very hard for most Indigenous people. I didn't grow up on the res or anything, but it's very hard for most Indigenous people to talk about themselves. So like Luke would never probably say this, but he's done extensive work. For example, down on the Pine Ridge Reservation where his dad is from, he was able to help eliminate alcohol sales. And he worked for a long time to eliminate alcohol sales close to the reservation. So in the off-reservation town of White Clean, Nebraska, they were selling millions of dollars worth of alcohol to Pine Ridge residents every year, when really by treaty, there was not supposed to be an alcohol establishment within so many miles of the reservation. So they were literally breaking the law. So Luke has done work in that, the sovereignty aspects of saying, hey, you have to respect these treaty rights, and has always been a part of various treaty councils and reading the treaty that impacts his people specifically. So yeah, important stuff.
So you might have touched on this question, Linda. So as a Caucasian person with colonial ancestry, I can't talk today. I don't know. Who wishes to be an ally and make amends in my timeline, what do you think is the most appropriate and respectful way to approach furthering my knowledge of Indigenous plant medicine and learning more in general from and about Indigenous peoples without being appropriating?
Yeah, this is like a huge issue, and I know Luke will have something to say about this too. I think it's so important, like I was saying at the beginning, for non-Indigenous people to get back in touch with their traditional plants and their traditions and their ceremonies and things like that. Obviously there are some Indigenous people who will, who are happy to share knowledge and information. Even though I'm a teacher and I love to teach, there are things that I won't talk about publicly. There's things that have been shared with me that I don't share with others because, that's been requested. I think that it's really important not to commodify Indigenous knowledge. So if you are not Native, don't buy traditional plants from places like what's that American urban there was Urban Outfitters was selling sage and little shells to burn sage in, and that was of course a horrible, I mean, just absolutely horrible. And they were using Salvia apiana, which is not only an important sacred plant, but a plant that to many Indigenous people, but it's a plant that is being severely over-harvested in the wild. And so, I think it's so important to not do those kinds of things, not allowing your people, your friends to colonize Indigenous medicine or to commodify it. It's exhausting for us sometimes to try to always, be on social media and say, you might not want to be doing that. And so we really need our allies and our friends to tell each other. Right? Like do that, like take that lead up because I'm tired. Along with like trying to get in touch with your traditional knowledge and things like that, I think it's important to say also that we were talking about Salvia apiana and how it's being overharvested in the wild. There are a lot of plants that are being overharvested, and so maybe sometimes consider leaving those plants for indigenous people and finding really beautiful, great alternatives. So, for example, OSHA is being overharvested at a pretty drastic rate. So why not use things with similar properties like lovage, for example? There are others that are great alternatives to Ligusticum porteri or, OSHA root. I think finding those things out and, helping each other, supporting each other, I think it's so important.
And I think that realizing that, especially if you travel across the country, that you're going to be in different indigenous territories as you go along. One of the problems we ran into, not really a problem, but one of the difficulties we've run into is so like one time there was a gentleman who learned about a certain plant from one indigenous community, and within that community, it was perfectly okay for everyone to have access to that plant. It wasn't a big deal. You could go out and pick it at any point in time. The things that he was taught from that group of people was completely different. When he got around another group of people, they had strict rules about that plant and about its usage, about who could touch it, about what what went into gathering that plant, and so realizing and respecting where you're at, and as much as you can. I know we can't gain intimate knowledge about every I can't even gain every knowledge about every tribal group across this country. But having some respect for that, as from community to community. There are some, like traditional Dene people can't talk about or go around grave sites. And that's something that I have to know about my Dene friends, my Navajo friends, and be respectful of that. And so if I take them around to places where in my territory, I realize that that's something that goes with their culture, and I don't take them to those types of places.
So important, the distinction too, and realizing that indigenous people, there are hundreds and hundreds of distinct nations with different cultures and languages and protocols. Is important.
Not trying to make it all a cookie cutter type of situation.
Right.
That's definitely good to keep in mind, and something that, like, I know that there's a lot of tribes, but I didn't even think about each tribe had so many varied ways of living and stuff like that, and working with each plant and everything else. And it's, wow, my mind is like, I guess when we were writing the question, I was thinking about, like, if I wanted to learn more about, like, the Cherokee is the main tribe here, more about how they use the plants in this area, just to learn more about my home and where I live. And maybe this is like a much longer conversation about sort of like, how do you, like, there's some books on native plants, but I don't trust them. Like, I don't even know who wrote them. Like, I don't know. So it's like, how do I start to try to just develop some knowledge? And I do love the idea, and I didn't even really think about it, about going back to my roots and trying to learn more about the ways that the people in Russia dealt with herbalism and stuff like that. So I'm definitely going to be researching that as well. So that was my question. How do you even ask? And it might be something that I don't want to disrespect anybody. I just feel very awkward. I feel even almost like I don't maybe have, even just because of what, there's so much between what the
the history is complicated, and you're just trying to not bring all that into the present. When
I want to try to
and yet to connect. Yeah, no, I think that that's a really valid question, and the thing is in like we always encourage people, like, if, being out there, connect with community out there. And the thing is they will let you know if they don't want to share. I mean, there are community activities on the Eastern Band of Cherokee, like wide open community activities on the reservation all the time. Some are open to non-natives and some aren't. And it's so, attending some of those, talking to people, asking about their protocols, asking that question of how can I respectfully learn about traditional Cherokee plant knowledge without overstepping, and so that I can better connect to the plants and people in this area on which I live. It's a wonderful question, and it's going to vary from place to place. I think people are often scared to get in touch with the people in their area, right? You don't want to do anything disrespectful, and you're also kind of like, yeah, they've probably had enough of questions, right? I mean, yeah. and that's totally okay. But I'll tell you, people will let you know if they've had enough, and you just that's I guess another thing that we can say is you have to be open to accepting whatever answer you get.
Okay.
This kind of piggybacks on that sort of topic. But I want to think of it in a broader sense, okay, in the human community sense. But starting more specifically, I think that despite the horrible history that your people and really all Indigenous people on at this point almost every continent has had to endure and things that they've been robbed of, it's still inspiring how much you've managed to preserve and continue working at regrowing and strengthening and protecting your knowledge and literal tracts of land and bodies of water and songs and languages. And there's, I think that's very fortunate to have deeply rooted ties to a place and a people. And I think maybe some other reason that so many people of colonial ancestry tend to go about doing things that outright become appropriation from cultural traditions of all kinds is because we're sort of like the lost little mutt that's wandering around, so to speak, and has, doesn't know where's my home. And so, you're talking about the importance of reconnecting to one's own ancestral roots as far as the plant knowledge and nutritional knowledge, or, any kind of cultural thing that we might feel a yearning for that we want to make relevant in our lives. Well, it makes sense to look to where we came from and carry that with us, which is awesome. It was actually a really eye-opening article I saw come out around the time that everything was happening with the protests at Standing Rock. There was an article saying, don't come here if all you're doing is coming here to be like, just teach me your wise ways. It's like, no, you're here to listen, and you're going to help the way we need you to help, or you don't need to be here at all. And it kind of had this sort of side note of, by the way, if you care that much about this sort of thing, like just learn it from your own background,
I think I wrote that article.
Oh, that might have been very well done. It was like, yeah, it was the best thing I had read of, like, put people in their place in the most profoundly important way possible. In the broader sense, right? Humans in general, we long for a sense of belonging, and we intimately crave connection with each other. And I would even argue nature in general and all other living things, even those of us, entire cultures that have disconnected from it. Maybe some of our struggles and disconnect come from the fact that we can't reconcile that what we're really meaning, what we're really needing and wanting is those connections. Being from a people that has held more securely to those sorts of roots, how might you say that sort of connection can be translated in a way that would be a broader and balanced for anyone, anywhere they are, to have a better relation with the world around them? because I have been making, actually since reading that article, more concentrated efforts in learning roots of what, went into my DNA and so forth. But here I am sitting in North Carolina with no plans or capital to go anywhere else anytime soon. There's still that feeling of like, well, I want to do right by the place that I am. And I'm not even just meaning in terms of, the subject we just covered, in terms of, because that is important, making that bridge with the people that were here first, but also in the present, the land that I'm on, that sort of thing. Yep. I don't know how you might conceptualize that.
Something I'll say here, and I've talked about it before, is that I have the privilege of living in a place where I can walk outside and, within 10 minutes, I can be gathering 200 different plant medicines and foods and things like that. I have a lot of friends who live in extremely urban areas where they cannot do that. Now, on one hand, I tell people that within 50 yards of any building, I guarantee you there are at least 10 edible plants. I don't know if you'd want to eat the plants that grow out of the cracks of your sidewalk if you live in a really industrial area, but you could. And those plants are there because nature is amazing and resilient. So on one hand, I understand that not everyone has the privilege of being able to get outside and get in touch with Mother Earth. On the other hand, I think it's so important when I'm giving people recipes, when I'm telling them about how certain plants are used for food or medicine, I think a lot of people go straight to their favorite website to purchase those herbs. And they never develop a relationship with those plants. So they order them online and they come in plastic bags and then they make the medicine. But I have a lot of people who've been working with plants for years who have no idea what those actual living plants look like, right? They haven't worked to develop a relationship with them at all. And so it's so important to develop a relationship with those plants and develop a relationship with the habitats in which those plants grow and the larger environments in which those plants grow. And then with the people that surround those plants, it's so important. I would say that, make the commitment to do that, to develop those relationships, but not just make a relationship with those plants, because here's the thing. I got pepper sprayed and shot by rubber bullets and shot with water cannons when temperatures were below freezing and, chased by dogs and everything in defense of not just the people in the water, but of the plants as well. And so, and Luke has been there as well, and so when you purchase those plants online, sometimes people are not remembering that there are literally people of color, Indigenous people in particular, standing up to protect those plants as our relatives. People may be able to purchase them without any thought or regard for the land that those plants came from, but we can't do that, right? Every time we're out there, plant medicine is political. It is inherently political. It's important to remember that if you are going to get out there and develop these relationships and utilize these plants and make medicine, then you need to also be standing by Indigenous people when their land and plants and water and air is under attack. Can't just make medicine without thinking about the land that those plants came from and the people who are standing up to fight for them. That would be my answer.
I'm always surprised when people haven't seen the plant in real life. I was talking to an acupuncturist and I guess he used moxa, which is what they make from mugwort, but he's never seen a mugwort plant. And I was like, how could you not ever? It grows freaking everywhere. There's there's a whole soccer field that's mugwort. They mow it, but it's just I'm like, oh my gosh, this whole. Yeah. And for me, I sort of feel I first meet the plant in the wild, outside or in its habitat, and then I think I'll make a medicine from it. I mean, I think we're also lucky here in Western North Carolina in the mountains. We have a lot of plants as well. It's very biodiverse. So even in Asheville in town here, there's medicinal herbs everywhere. even though it's more urban than out where Ellen is. It's still more so than if you know, were my family comes from New York, so it's even more so than in Brooklyn and stuff like that. So
right. Yeah, we have friends who we talk about her all the time. Our neighbor who sprays her lawn to kill all the dandelions, and then she drives 2 hours to the nearest town to buy organic dandelion root tea for her liver. You know,
wow.
It's just the weirdest thing ever. Don't do that. Everyone benefits from settler colonialism, but we have a lot of friends who not friends, associates. Everyone's my friend. We have we know a lot of people, especially during the no DAPL camps. We met a lot of people who directly benefit from Indigenous people and Indigenous knowledge, whether they use plant medicine, whether they, live on this land and work on this land or drill oil on this land. They directly benefit from the colonization of Indigenous people. And yet they weren't willing to stand up and say, hey, these same people who we're benefiting from, we should fight alongside them. I just can't believe there's people who eat wild rice, like non-native people who eat wild rice, but aren't willing to stand up against line 3 with the Ojibwe. Then stop eating their freaking wild rice. It's just one of those things, you can't depoliticize these things,
and you can't separate the people from the land, nor should you want to.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So what advice would you both give to any budding fellow plant nerd, ecologist, permaculturist, and activist, and so forth?
So I would say, for all of that, eat more green stuff. Just get out there and eat more wild green stuff.
Yes.
And as far as activists, get educated about what's going on around you, especially what you can do about changing the climate around you, or, how you can save bees. There are just so many issues, and that's one of the things that's hard with being an Indigenous activist, is that you have to have such a broad knowledge base about so many subjects, but the thing is there are so many things out there that are going on, and so get yourself educated about what's going on around you and how you can support those things.
Yeah. No, and one thing that I always recommend to people is know your watershed. If you put a map in front of me right now, I could map out all the watersheds around us, because that's really important. Know where the pipelines are around you, just as a matter of awareness. You'll be shocked. You'll be shocked how many of them run right under you, right around you all the time. Listen to people and try not to be so judgy. There's so much judgmental stuff going on. Like Luke said, being aware, because the thing is line 3, the no DAPL movement, not the only 2 important things going on right now. We have friends up in the Northwest who are fighting Trans-Canada and, fighting the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And, our friend Kanahus Manuel, she put up tiny homes right in the path of these pipeline that's threatening her water and land and Secwepemc sovereignty. We have friends, native and non-native, who are fighting pipelines down in your area. Her sitting in trees to try to prevent these trees from being cut down. And, we need to be aware of all of these. And, Bears Ear National Monument, still not completely safe down in the Southwest. I mean, we try to be aware of all of this.
Our relatives in Central and South America who are fighting many different climate issues. There are people in Africa. There are people in Europe who are still fighting these things.
Yes, yeah, there are people in Europe fighting pipelines in Europe. I mean, it's not just here, and we try to be aware of all of them so we can stand with them when they need us. And this is another thing that I recommend. anytime you start feeling tired, anytime you start feeling exhausted when it comes to, activist work, like I remember being, I was like literally complaining about how tired I was and just about how little impact I feel like I'm making. And like, I look up in this lady who is in her 80s, who has been fighting. She's been an activist since the civil rights movement got up on stage, and I thought, oh, holy crap, I have no idea. I have no right to talk about how tired I am when this woman is still fighting the fight in her 80s, and like Luke's mom, Candace Ducheneau, she's still fighting the fight in her mid 70s. We have to remember that anytime we're feeling tired, that there's people who've been doing this a lot longer than us, been arrested way more many times than any of us, and stand with them too. So
keep chipping away at it.
The Washington football team changed their mascot last year, and that there's a huge thing. I posted a picture of myself, 19 years old, standing out in front of a stadium, holding up a sign against them. And here I am in my 40s, and it finally happened. I was like, it happens. You just got to keep chipping away. So.
Do you two have any exciting new ventures coming up that you want to share with the audience in terms of anything you're launching, educational opportunities you're offering, things that you're studying, a particular call to action, etc.?
We're just always doing so many things that it's like, oh God, top line.
Follow you on Facebook. That's been one of the most helpful things. What's Linda up to today?
Yeah, and we try, like I said, we try to like always be working with everyone, but definitely I think that we're probably going to be issues with mining in the Black Hills on traditional homelands of the Lakota is probably going to start spouting off again here really soon, and be aware of that. The food sovereignty movement, we're going to start seeing many new things. So, be there to help and support. We are always making medicine kits for people, and that always takes a lot of resources that we don't have. So we always, put out calls for help. So we're always receiving medicines and, different items from people to make those medicines. And we're always grateful for that. So
right now we're kind of going into our kind of closing down season. It's coming winter. We have a really harsh winter in the Dakotas. So we'll be kind of shut down for about 3 months or 4 months, 5 months sometimes. But next year when spring starts coming around, we encourage everyone to start doing gardens, more and more gardening, more and more wild foraging. And like Ellen was saying, just keep an eye on Linda's Facebook and her Instagram, because we're going to probably be doing a lot of harvesting camps like we did this year, again, trying to do more of those and get people more interested in doing wild harvesting.
In a respectful way, to with respect to the land, where we walk softly on the land, but we still are aware of the plants and we're eating those and using them for medicine. We'll even be down in you all's area.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
wow.
In the spring. So I'll keep you updated on
yes. And I'll put the links to your Facebook and Instagram so everyone can check those out.
Yep. Awesome.
And
thank you guys so much for having us.
Oh, thank you.
We'll continue this hopefully at a not too distant date.
Definitely. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you.
right. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Join us for our next episode, and we'll be speaking with farmer and herbalist, founder of Enchantment Creek Apothecary in Wyoming, Heather Jones. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.